Hi, my name is Brandan Dennehy. I am a short drama executive in the United States.
What is short drama? Are there any genres that are unique to short dramas?
Genres that are unique to short dramas, no, but genres that are very intense in short dramas, yes. I would say soap opera, which, coming from China would be urban romance, is dominant genre. And then within that, there are many what I would call micro genres, whether it's sports romance or mafia romance or variations on that. That's sort of what short drama is currently in terms of the genre diversity. It's a lot of soap operas with different flavors added on top of it.
How do you define short drama?
So I would say bite-sized episodes, extremely fast-paced storytelling, extremely heightened emotional stakes, melodrama, and something that really hooks the audience and keeps hooking them over and over and over again. The quickest way to describe it is if Netflix and TikTok had like a baby, that's what short dramas are.
Why do short dramas go viral? Are there any formula behind the hits?
Definitely not a formula, but there is a format, which, every major entertainment format, whether it's film, TV, whatever, there's certain structure to it. And so short dramas being new, a lot of people just aren't familiar with the structures there. But the format very much is built off of the same DNA as TikTok or Instagram, where it's very much an instant gratification style storytelling. It's which why it has to be so intense in the melodrama and in the emotional heightened stakes. And so formula wise, no, but there are certain elements that it kind of has to have to be a short drama, or else it won't go viral. In terms of it has to have a really big hook. Otherwise, people when they're scrolling through whatever they're scrolling through, they'll see something and within a few microseconds they decide whether they're going to keep scrolling or not. So if you don't hook that audience right away, you're not going to go viral. You don't exist at that point, so you're not a short drama. And then the other thing is constantly renewing that heightened element of high stakes, surprise, emotion, cliffhangers, revelations, all that kind of stuff that you would get in any long form storytelling like film or TV, but like really distilled down to its most essential element and very, very heightened. So that's kind of very much how social media works also. This very emotionally it hooks you instantly, or you keep scrolling. And so that's they go viral. And that's why they work so well on Facebook, Instagram Reels, TikTok, which is where all the marketing for these things are, which is how people find them.
Why do you think short dramas are resonate with the audience?
I think it's an inevitability. Social media has come onto culture so fast and evolved user behavior so fast that eventually storytelling was going to catch up to that platform, that format. And this is how it caught up. It's storytelling like you would see in film and TV, but in that sort of extremely intense, fast, instant gratification style of content consumption that people who are scrolling through their I don't know if they would desire that. That's just how it works. That's how social media works. That's why we're all kind of addicted to our phones these days. And so this is a storytelling format that caught up to that style of user behavior, basically. And so that's why short dramas are the way they are. That's why they're built the way they are. That's why they work the way they do.
So do you think traditional media like TV series, streaming platforms, or cinemas or films will die and short drama will dominate the market?
No, I don't think it'll die. I think that there's a continual contraction of film and television, and that's not because of short dramas. It's because of a whole lot of things. Just user behaviors over time shift, and so more content exists now than ever before. So there's just not enough eyeballs to go around for everything. So the of Hollywood dominating entertainment, that's come to an end, and is not fun for most of us to grew up in Hollywood and work in Hollywood. But it's still going to be premier content at a high level. There will still be a market for that stuff. It just won't be as monolithic and big as it has been for like the last 50 plus years. It'll now be a very large segment of entertainment. Microdramas will be a segment of entertainment. Video games is obviously another very large segment of entertainment. So it's not going to die off. It's just not going to be the only thing that's out there. So a lot of people will like to consume short dramas or whatever short dramas evolve into, because this is all very new. whatever that evolves into over time, there will be people that prefer to watch stuff like that. There will be people that prefer to watch stuff on their couch, on their television, and there will be people that still love to go to the theater. So it's not going to die off.
Tell us about the strategy and content.
The Stratagem content is essentially a short drama consultancy slash development company. It is me being one of the first short drama executives or producers or whatever you want to put a label on that as in the United States. I have connected with many of these apps, many of the independent producers, a lot of the talent who are just being introduced to short dramas for the first time. I happen to be in it for a couple of years before everybody else. And so I was just in a position to be kind of a guiding figure in that area. I figured I might as well try to make a living at that or try to monetize that. And so that's what Stratagem content is. It is a short drama, vertical drama, United States focused consultancy for whether it's apps that are starting up, whether it's established apps that are already in the space that are looking for more understandings of the market and the audiences and user behaviors and what kind of shows are we not making that we should be making, whether it's producers in the United States that are looking to understand the space because they got asked by an app to produce one thing, but they don't really know anything about it yet, or it's talent that's looking to shift from TV into this space. I just got email today from a writer who's got a laundry list of Hollywood credits asking, hey, can you tell me more about this short drama stuff? I'm seeing it all over the place. I'd like to know what this is. So basically, I'm kind of hoping to be the go-to guy in LA anyways, to help people in the West get into short dramas, understand short dramas, and hopefully start making a lot of short dramas.
Provide suggestions and information, or you provide scripts as well?
So I have writers, nobody's in-house. I've writers that we can contract to develop ideas. I've got writers that can execute ideas, and working with independent producers mostly in that area to bring in writers to help them have scripts to then go out and make material that they can sell to these apps because all the apps are looking for new shows all the time. And then I've worked with a couple of the major apps, major Chinese apps, identify writers or creative leads or things like that to bring in-house to their company so they have Western voices in-house. Because up until fairly recently, with the exception of ReelShort, most of these apps, were playing catch up and they were coming from China and they were hiring mostly bilingual Chinese talent, a lot of whom were in the United States already because they'd gone to school in the United States and been working in entertainment in some degree for a couple of years, but they were still Chinese. So there were still gaps in their understandings of the US audience, the US genres, the market in general. And so I've worked with some of these apps to help them find local talent that has experience in the space already that can come in and help them execute shows that work better for the audience here.
At Pocket FM, you used to work there and you led the US content scene and produce a massive amount of microdramas and audience series, over 10,000 hours. So what was your team strategy behind that? How did you make the content work for the US market?
A little bit before the pandemic, I'd been working in Hollywood for over a decade and I kind of saw the cracks in the industry coming. It was already very hard to get anything made in this business. Even if you've worked with every major studio or you've worked with HBO or been on, major shows, it's still very difficult to just keep working. And it became obvious that it was only going to get harder as time went on because it was going to contract. And then the pandemic hit, killed all of my projects in my development deal. By pure serendipity, PocketFM reached out because they were looking to expand into the US. And so I met with their founders and their CEO. I really loved their Netflix of audio pitch because they were an audio company exclusively at that time. And so I joined them to some executives, development executives, creative executives to build it like a TV studio has, where we work with Hollywood writers to create new series, put them in the app. Very quickly, that all changed, and we got under the hood and sort of saw what Pocket FM was, which was anybody that works in short dramas would recognize it. We would license Chinese web fiction and then localize it for the US market and then produce it as an audio series. And so very quickly, what I did was build teams of writers, train them on how to localize the content, train them initially on what is the content, because the Chinese content coming over at that point was Google translated essentially, and showing Americans for the first time a poorly translated Chinese web novel, their brains don't understand what they're looking at because it's just not what there's nothing seen before. Training teams of people how to localize Chinese web fiction, commissioning teams on what to look for and what not to look for when licensing content. Like, guys, stop licensing the historical fiction because the Chinese historical fiction and the U.S. audience are they're just not. We're not going to localize that, not on any sort of timeline that makes sense to publish. And basically training teams of creatives to make shows for the U.S. audience that originated in China. Probably about a year into that process, Reel Shorts became a thing. Pocket FM became very aware of Reel Shorts, and so we then started a live action team as well. So we started doing vertical drama, short drama, whatever you want to call it, content in the same model that we were doing the audio series content, which, as it turns out, is the same model that Good Short and DramaBox and Real Short and everybody else is doing their content. They're getting content from largely they're getting content from China, licensing it, and then localizing it for the U.S. audience. And that's both a blessing and a curse in the sense that it's much easier to get off stuff and adapt it and put it into your app very quickly, and then you can turn around successful shows that way. But it also sort of limits the type of shows they can make in terms of their genres or the types of characters that are in their shows or that kind of stuff. So Pocket FM was very much analogous to my time in short drama now, which is finding creatives, training them on what the stuff is, how to understand it, how to adapt it, how to produce it, and how to turn it around very quickly. This business is all about speed.
When you talk about the audiobooks, how do you train the writers to localize it? Because some elements are very Chinese.
Obviously, the easiest content to adapt, localize is the urban romance from China, which is, I would say, 75 to 80% similar to US soap operas that people are familiar with. The heightened melodrama, the relationship stuff, the family politics, a lot of that stuff, it's just one to one. But then the real difference comes in the real underlying difference in the Chinese content and the US content in the soap opera space is the sort of power dynamics. The Chinese content very frequently is the might makes right type of dynamic, whereas in the US it's a much more individualistic good versus evil, or that's the good guy, that's the bad guy type of thing. And training the writers to understand that power dynamic and how to adapt it from an Eastern style to a Western style was the key to getting romance drama stuff to work, soap opera stuff to work. Again, that stuff was already like 75% of the way to being recognizable to the US audience. The really big challenge was in genres, fantasy, Eastern fantasy, again, like historical dramas. The US audience just has no frame of reference. There's a niche fan base over here that likes cultivation style novels, but the broad audience here, if you put like a Shanxia style story in front of them, they just don't know what they're looking at. So training our creatives and our producers to understand what that content is, and then their brains can start to put the pieces together in terms of, oh, that's kind of like this other book, or that's like this other thing. They can start to understand how a Eastern fantasy cultivation story could work for a US audience. And it can work very well. There are novels that have come out in the last decade here that are huge hits that are basically cultivation novels, but they're written by a Western writer with a Western storytelling understanding. So teaching writers, giving writers the tools to understand how to adapt certain types of genres for certain audiences, putting people through rigorous training on things that they've never even heard of before. It's not as complicated as it sounds, but it's also very difficult when you're trying to do it at a scale that these companies are working at. At Pocket, we were trying to put out 100 plus shows a month. DramaBox, I think they're trying to put out 25 short dramas a month. Like, the scale and the speed that you're working at, if you're trying to bring in writers and talent into that space, Western people into that space who don't really know the source material, have never really understood the source material, there's a big gap between how you need to get stuff out the door and how much you can like train people to understand what they're doing so they can get good at that thing. And that's really the magic gray area that you're trying to figure out if you're one of these apps trying to get more stuff into, you could make 1 million CEO billionaire romances, but eventually you've made them all 20 times over. So getting people in the door that can really help you make something else that the audience here will love. That's sort of where a lot of the question marks come into play. And that's where I try to step in and help figure things out.
You mentioned about 75% are romance, urban romance, right? And the other including what genres? Fantasy?
The vast majority is urban romance. There's also paranormal romance, which is vampires and shifters, which a lot of people here call werewolves, which is not correct. Uh, Pedantically speaking, shifters are like people that turn into wolves. And there's a whole subgenre of shifter romance novels in the US that's been very popular for, probably 15 plus years in the self-publishing sector. And so, unsurprisingly, as some of these apps started to get more into the shifter romance, the paranormal shifter romance stuff, they started to see shows that were generating revenue outside of CEOs and billionaires. So that's one area. Another area is sports romance, which in the U.S. is another, just in the last probably 5 to 6 years, has become a huge genre in publishing in the U.S. And that's for an audience typically that's a little bit younger than the CEO billionaire stuff does, with a lot of the same tropes, a lot of the same drama, soapy stuff, but in a slightly different world with slightly different characters. Basically helping people understand the nuances between these different genres, subgenres, microgenres, the types of character archetypes that are in them, the types of tropes that are in them, helps them. The more that these companies understand these things, the more that these producers understand these things, the more you'll start to see more and more big hits that are not just CEOs, billionaires that are carbon copied from one app to the next app to the
Vampire stories, but they are not originally from Chinese content, Chinese.
correct.
So that's
Yeah. So the way that worked in the short drama world is, in the United States, web fiction isn't like a huge thing. Fan fiction is online, but online fiction is not a huge thing. And the reason for that is self-publishing already existed here. So anybody that wants to write a book and put it on the internet to sell can do that. And that's been around. Amazon basically set up an avenue for anybody that wants to do that to do that. And they almost all of that industry. And because of that, web fiction didn't take off here the same way it did in China. There are entire fan bases, communities, genre nerds in that are consuming all of that space, whether they're people that love hockey, sports romance, or the people that love paranormal shifter romance, or their romantasy, or their whatever. There are these microgenres, subgenres. There's dark romance. There's spicy content. Like, there's all this stuff out there that's existed and has been successful in its own right in self publishing and in the main publishing industry. Paranormal romance is one of those things. Like, you can go back and see that's crossed over into the mainstream in a big way when Twilight came out. Like, that went from basically an amateur writing, self-published material, a giant franchise. That's an established genre now that before was niche. And sports romance is its moment now where it's becoming an established genre. So things like that are working their way into some of these apps in the United States, because some of these apps in the United States have some understanding of that space. ReelShort was already had creative talent from that self-publishing space or adjacent spaces before they were even making short dramas. And so when they pivoted people into short dramas, those people said, we need to make sports romance. We need to make paranormal shifter romance. And so you start to see that stuff work itself into their catalog, their library. And then the other apps start to see it happening and they do it. And then you've got other players like Good Novel or Dreamy or whoever who had their own online fiction platforms already. And because online fiction and self-publishing have major overlap, paranormal romance was a big part of online fiction. And so the apps that have their own online fiction subsidiary or sister company that existed before their short drama company did, they've already got that content to pull from. So they already had werewolf, paranormal shifter stuff. And so that's how you see it come into some of these apps. If they were relying 100% on remake rights from China, it would be almost impossible stuff come into these apps. And so you are seeing some stuff make its way into these apps today, but still a drop in the bucket for what could be in these apps in terms of the types of stories, the types of genres, and the types of audiences they could be bringing in.
Hi, I'm Maggie Han, founder of Short Drama Alliance. People think short dramas are innovative because it's short or vertical. But the real game changer is paid traffic. That's what reshaped how short dramas are written. I explain this in my booklet, Short Drama Writing 101, links in the description.
What if a Chinese short drama app only have data proven in China? What's your suggestion to those apps if they want to do good content for the
Yeah,
American market?
that's a very good starting. If you've got validated shows, you've got a short drama that's got 1 billion views. Why not put it? Why not localize it and see if it can succeed, right? But that's kind of just the starting point. You have to also understand that this market was attacked very aggressively by the short drama industry. So there might be 7 of that show already. And if you are a startup, meaning you don't have a lot of capital, your marketing dollars probably aren't going to be huge. So you're not going to be able to play in the same pool as a real short or a drama box. Companies are spending hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in marketing, which is how people find out about the shows in the first place. So you might have 1 billion hits on your show, but you might be better off selling that show to another person in the market than making it yourself if you can't afford to spend $500,000, $800,000 on Facebook ads. And that's just the cost of marketing. That's assuming you can get an ad. The magic sauce behind this entire business is you have a show that you believe in. You then have to have ad creatives that will drive people to that show. And to drive people to that show, that means that ad creative they're scrolling through TikTok, they're scrolling through Instagram Reels, they're scrolling through Facebook. They're going to see that ad. If that ad doesn't hook them, then you don't have an ad that works. So you can't spend money on that ad, come to your show from it. So you have to have a team of people or AI at this point, who knows, that is constantly cutting different ads for your short drama. Until you've got one that drives people to your app. And then that's when you spend your hundreds of thousands on that ad to drive a lot of people to your app. So the longest way to answer your question probably is if you've got a really good data validated show, you have to then evaluate what your business model is. If your business model is we've got money to spend on marketing, then yeah, localize that thing, put it into your app and get an ad creative that works and spend on it. If you've got the content, but you don't have the rest of the package to spend on, you might be better off licensing or selling remake rights or whatever, other alternatives you've got.
Some Chinese company, they have some hit short dramas and they dubbed into English.
And then if the results are good, they will localize it. That's one strategy. The other strategy, I heard some company that just have headquarters in the US. So they hire local people. So they produce original scripts. So what's your comments on those strategies?
Yeah, it comes down to sort of the company's business model and what their capital, what their available capital is for certain things. If you've got Chinese content and you've got money to market and your content is validated and you want to localize it and put it into the US, however you want to test it, whether that's dubbing it and putting it in the app and seeing if it does well, or it's just localizing it and then getting an ad creative out and testing those. However you want to validate it locally, then you should do that. You should go for that because that model has been proven to work. And until it doesn't work, you shouldn't not do it. But that's where the challenge comes in for some of these companies is they've been doing that and it's been working, but then they have to ask themselves a question like, do we reallocate some of our cost and take a shot on originals? Meaning we bring in people that are more familiar with the market and other genres and stuff like that, who can create shows locally, but maybe don't have as much short drama experience. So maybe what they make won't be as effective. Do we spend all of our money on we have seen been working, or do we take some of our money and put it on to a bigger risk? And that's the question a lot of the apps are trying to balance. And you're seeing ReelShort had first mover advantage in the States, but it also had some local talent from day one. And because of that, you're seeing them be able to execute some more diversity in genre, some more original ideas. Then you've got other apps that are basically functioning like startups, and they have to spend their dollars much more carefully. And so they have to weigh the risk of, do we spend on a new original on this writer that we really believe in with the story that we really believe in, or do we take that money and spend it on licensing and localizing 4 other titles from China that have really good validation numbers in China and that we feel we could probably get at least one good ad out of, and then one of those shows will be a big hit for us. So that's the double-edged sword they're trying to figure out right now.
I interview other directors and producers because a lot of Chinese shows, they have some shock value, a lot of violence that cut into promotion ads. If there's no shock value, people won't click the ads. So how do you see those shock values?
That was one of the major sort of learning curves with Pocket FM was we're getting all this content in. A lot of it is, what you might call inappropriate or toxic or whatever you want to call it. You then have to calculate, well, if we soften those elements or change those elements, are we taking out the thing that actually made it successful, right? And at a certain point, that comes down to culture, that comes down to personnel. One thing that I was always very careful of at Pocket and that I've talked to a dozen of these companies about is a lot of the content that comes in starts with, a woman being roofied and waking up in a bed, not remembering who this guy is, or worse than that. And you have to be aware if you're going to bring in people that you want to help you make these shows successful, you don't know those people's histories, their backgrounds. You might be giving them material that is triggering them because of some traumatic stuff that's happened to them in their lives. So you have to be very aware and open with the type of content you're working with and make sure that everybody is on board with that content and that everybody understands there are certain lines that you can't cross, that you won't cross, and that there are certain lines that are, you're pushing the envelope in terms of, what somebody might be disgusted by, another audience might really love. And so you have to figure out where do we not cross a line and where do we give the fans that love a really toxic romance story or that love a power dynamic that features brutality. How do we give what they want without, how do we make sure we deliver that show for those fans? And how do we make sure that we don't make a show beyond the acceptable barrier? And again, that becomes a big gray area. That involves a lot of people having conversations with legal departments and creative teams and all that kind of stuff. The long and the short of it is, you have to be aware that you might have a title that's highly validated from the source material that you want to license and adapt, or that you want to put in your app yourself. But if that material is too much for a general audience in some way, that you would have to alter the thing that actually made that show work, you might want to put that show further down on your list of adaptations and pick something else first. I would say that it's very easy to adapt a show away from made it work, whether it's toxic stuff or not toxic stuff. And so that's one of the big things you always have to be aware of. So if you have a show that has content that it disrupts the creative team that's working on it, then you probably want to have conversations openly and more honestly before that type of content ever even comes in the door. Because you want the show to work. You don't want to change the show so it doesn't work. And you also don't want to put out a show that's going to get, your app in trouble because it's disturbing in certain ways, right? So it's a complicated gray area, essentially.
Can you give me an example?
Obvious lines would be, rape. Certainly, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put that out. Over the top, gratuitous violence of some kind. Obviously, that is very genre specific as well. You can go as over the top as you want in a monster slaying anime, but that's not the same for a, dark romance. Dark romance features a lot of morally ambiguous, morally gray themes, which is why the audience loves it. And it's one of those genres that has that you have to have conversations before you start working on it. If the violence is so over the top and brutal, it's going to cross a line, and it does become at a certain point. That's why you have to have open and honest conversations between the creative team and oftentimes other departments as well. So that's what I would say in terms of if you're going to be an app that's okay to put out dark romance or things that push the barrier in certain and morally ambiguous areas, then you have to be prepared to set your teams up to do those things, because it's very easy for these companies to turn into a well-oiled machine. And then these things just come through the door one day and nobody knew it was coming in, and you hand it to a team and their heads explode because, they're revolting because they can't believe how disgusting it is. And then there's, somebody else over there that's like, oh, I love this stuff. Let me do it. So you have to set up your team to be ready to work on that kind of stuff. or to not work on it, to say, no, we're not working on this.
What kind of content do you think is proper to show in the promotional video?
That's less up to you than it is up to ads platforms. And one of the great frustrations in this business is how random the ads platforms seem to be. I can remember one show we were promoting where two people were just talking about having had sex earlier, and not in an explicit or graphic way, no nudity. They had just talked about like, oh, that was great, basically is what they're saying. Got flagged, got pulled down, can't do that. And then the next day on another show, I don't remember what the thing was, but it was like gratuitous and it was clearly over the line, didn't get flagged. The ad went out, it ran on Facebook for 3 weeks and nobody said anything about it. It's kind of how much are you willing to get flagged by Meta or TikTok or whoever for your content, and then re-edit your content or adjust your content until you find the thing that works. And it's very frustrating because it can, especially when you creative team in to do the work, they start to feel like they don't know what they can do and what they can't do. They start to feel like they're handcuffed in certain areas, and they start to, honestly, it's very easy for that team to then stop short of going as far as they should to make the best ad possible. And so there is no perfect answer for that question, because you could send the same ad out twice and one day it gets flagged for inappropriate content and the next day it doesn't. And so I would just say you just have to have your ad creative teams be ready to rework stuff, and don't hold back until you've hit the red flag and that ad got pulled for some reason.
Right now, most English language short dramas focus on CEO romance, so love stories. So, in your opinion, what other genres are worth exploring in the global market, especially in the English market, and why?
Yeah, I think in the English market, there's huge white space still. That's not to say that you could just start doing horror or true crime or whatever tomorrow and it would just work as well. The reason they're all doing CEO billionaire stuff is because that's what they have access to from source material, and that's what's worked really well. So they're going to keep doing it. Somebody's going to have to, probably from the independent space, make a really good horror short drama or a really good anime style short drama, like a fantasy, progression fantasy, lit RPG, cultivation style story, in the independent space on their own buck, and put it into their own social media space for it to go viral. And then you'll see some of these other players realize, oh, we can allocate resources to making horror. We can allocate resources to making, detective thriller style stuff. And obviously, there's a big gap between what they're doing now and some of that stuff, which makes them very hesitant to take the risk on it, because they know the thing they're doing now, maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 of the things they're doing now are going to be a huge hit that keeps the whole app in the green for the year. And so if we take, 10% of our revenue away from that, 10% of our manpower away from that to try something else that we don't know how it's going to work, or if it's going to take 3 years to figure it out, that's why, you don't see them trying other stuff. But I would say horror is a no-brainer. You know, fantasy is a no-brainer. The related industries to short drama are online fiction and in the United States self-publishing, that are very, very successful in online fiction and self-publishing, are those romance style stories, the paranormal shifter style romance, CEO billionaire romance, bad boy high school romance, mafia romance, all that stuff, right, is very popular in that space. And then the other thing that's very popular in that space is fantasy, whether it's a lit RPG or there's 8 million different flavors of fantasy that's popular in that space as well. That's a no-brainer. And that was, for 2 years, we were working on making fantasy work at PocketFM. And even after I left, they were still working on it. And just in the last probably 6 months or so, they've really shifted hard into fantasy because they got it to work. They got shows that would work. They got My Vampire System in particular is a huge show for them, a great English language original web novel that they adapted, and it's worked great for them. So I would say fantasy is a big space. And there's a lot of ways to make vertical drama fantasy. It doesn't have to be live action. It can be animated. I mean, why not? And horror. Those are the two really obvious things. So
How do you use data you collected to inform future drama selection strategies? Can you give me an example?
well, if I was sitting down tomorrow to start from scratch with a startup, one of the first things I would do is get very plugged into the self-publishing industry. So there's different, data services. There are different methods that you can do it yourself method to track sales, to track trends, to track, what types of novels are hot right now, what types of novels are outliers, meaning this is extremely successful, but nobody else is making stuff like this. So maybe we shouldn't be following that as a trend. Whereas these 10 titles over here were less successful than that one, but they're all in a shifter romance, genre. Maybe we should be paying more attention to the shifter romance genre, that kind of stuff. So there are several services, whether Bookstat or Klytics or, you can, at this point, anybody overnight can build their own little tracking service with AI. You can track Amazon sales, you can track web novel platforms, things like that, just to see what's doing well at the moment.
According to a report I read, there are over 330 apps in the market, and most of them are backed by Chinese companies, many of which are targeting the North American audience. Why do you think Chinese short drama apps are able to compete in North America? If a new local US app were to emerge, what would they to do to stand out from the competition? And the third question is, from the other side, what do Chinese apps need to change or adapt in order to truly succeed in a North American market?
Yeah, I think the first one is it's as simple as just being first mover. China invented the format. And so, and we live in an age where technology is eventually to just go away. So it doesn't matter if you're a Chinese company or you're an Indian company or whatever, you can have an app that, is on the US Apple Store. So because China invented the format and you can, put an app into the Apple Store pretty quickly if you've got a DevOps team, that's why it's worked so well. Obviously, if the urban romance genre from China didn't translate as well into Western audiences, then those apps wouldn't have done very well. But that one genre on its own, combined with the marketing strategy, which works particularly well for the audience that likes that genre, for a US app to make its space for itself in that industry, one way that it would happen that I don't think is very likely is a major player in entertainment wants to get into that space. I mean, we already saw that happen and fail with Quibi because they tried to make the content like Hollywood content. So, the people that are consuming vertical dramas, short dramas, micro dramas, aren't necessarily looking for cinematic or big budget TV show style content. They're looking for something very quick, very efficient. One of the analogies I always like to use when trying to teach people about this stuff for the first time is if you're coming from Hollywood, the angle I was always coming from was like, oh, so you're a writer in Hollywood, you're basically a 5-star chef, right? Like you've trained for years, you understand every narrative element, you can do things with nuance, you can layer things. But not everybody wants to go to a 5-star restaurant and pay $200 to have an experience, right? Like a lot of people just want to stop at McDonald's on their way home from work and get something delicious and cheap, and they know exactly what they're getting because it's the same at every McDonald's, and they've had it 100 times before, and they know they like it, right? So that's what short drama is, right? It's the McDonald's of narrative, whereas a Marvel movie would be some people would roll their eyes at this comment. The 5-star, dinner would be like a Marvel movie. So it's very much about a U.S. company. If a U.S. company is going to get it, if a Netflix wants to experiment in this area, or Tubi would be the one that I would probably expect to be. They're going to have to understand the fast food style content, not the Hollywood style content, right? That's the first thing. Maybe it'll evolve into Hollywood style content down the road, but they're not going to break into the space that way. And then the other thing that I think is more likely for a US to emerge and make a real space for itself in this market is they're going to have to do something different, right? And like I said before, there's a ton of white space in the genre diversity. So, tomorrow somebody could come out with a horror specific vertical story app, right? And that could have one big hit in 6 weeks. It could be one of the biggest one downloaded apps in the App Store, because that's how this stuff works. Like one thing is a huge hit, and all of a sudden that app is downloaded like crazy. So, whether it's a genre specific app that comes out, whether it's a big player with big money forcing its way into the space and burning a lot of money as it figures out how to make the thing work, Those seem like the most likely scenarios to me.
If the Hollywood giants like let's say Netflix want to join the short drama game, how can they understand the Mike Donald style short drama?
Well, they can talk to me for starters. It's not rocket science. At least from the creative side of things, it's not rocket science. You could sit down 5 writers in a room and have them watch all these shows, watch some of the ads, and then just give them a brief overview of the business. Like, but obviously that's not how companies work. Companies, everything is supposed to be done yesterday. They get a report on a thing that doesn't have all the information in it. So I would say for a big company to move into the space, they're going to have a dedicated team that understands the space. That whether they don't understand it on day one, they take the time to learn the space, or they bring people in from the space and build a team to help them understand it and how to strategize, because they're not going to want to just do the exact same thing that DramaBox or ReelShort are doing. They're going to want to have their own angle to it. So they're going to want to bring people in from the space, and then those people are going to have to learn how to collaborate with a studio, which is a whole different ball game, and then see if the thing works at the end of the day. See if that collaboration works at the end of the day.
It sounds to me it's very easy if the big giants just buy or invest a short drama studio. Is it going to work?
I mean, maybe a few years ago that would be true, but right now the entire Hollywood industry is just like on shaky ground. So there's probably, this isn't, I could be very wrong about this. Probably isn't a lot of investment money flowing around right now for a company to go out and acquire something that they would probably consider experimental. Like they'd probably consider short drama experimental right now. And some of the players probably, if they're looking at it right now and seeing that it's making real revenue, are also seeing that it's very young and immature as just a sector. They're probably waiting for it to settle out, and they know that they can walk their way into it with money if they need to. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like Tubi is much more experimental than a lot of these other players. Netflix maybe will get experimental. They spend a lot of money on stuff that's not on the screen. But the rest of the industry seems to be just hoping that they don't go out of business right now. So we'll see how that goes.
If the Chinese short drama want to compete in North American market, what's your suggestion?
I mean, my suggestion is to make sure that you get some local creative talent in house, some local management in house that can be on the ground making real time decisions, because you do want to be able to make content that the local audience, is expecting. You want to meet audience expectations at a certain point. And if the only thing they're expecting is CEO billionaire romance, you're going to see this industry not be a real industry. You're going to see like one or two apps that do okay as a niche thing, and all the rest of them fall away. So if the industry is going to become a real industry, they are going to have to figure out how to make, and this isn't just true of the United States. They're going to have the same thing in Latin America, the same thing in Southeast Asia. That might be a little bit easier for the Chinese companies to figure out. Same thing in Europe, right? They're going to have some level of innovation, which in short drama is the Chinese stuff being localized for the US, because people have never quite seen this before. But they're also going to have to meet expectations, right? So that means they're going to have to make content that people do want. And right now, they're making content for a sliver of the audience, not a broad spectrum of the audience.
What do you think the short drama will become in the future?
The conversation I have a lot. One of my prevailing theories is that 5 years from now, it's going to be that, like I just said a second ago, there's going to be like 2 or 3 apps that are doing okay. All the other apps have gone away, and it's just what it is right now. That's one version. I don't think that's what it's going to be, but there's a realistic possibility of that. Another version is, 5-10 years from now, there's a dozen apps, and one of them is very specifically anime themed. One of them is very specifically, soap opera themed, or maybe 2 or 3 of them are soap opera themed. One of them is, there's an app kind of for an audience kind of thing. And then the other thing is the format will continue to evolve as the user behaviors continue to evolve. I don't think TikTok's going away, but if TikTok goes away, what happens to the user behavior? Because TikTok's a major reason why these things work. And it's not because people are on TikTok watching them. It's because the behavior of scrolling through something and instantly deciding whether you're going to stay on it or not. It's the behavior of UGC content consumption in general. Like you might see Hollywood content, premiere content, and UGC content as lo-fi or non, whatever you want to call it. But 10 years ago, that would have been, oh, this stuff it's not good because it's not high quality, it's not high production value. But today, it doesn't matter if it's high production value. Users are very used to, somebody sitting in their bedroom just talking. So they're very used to a dash cam video. They're very used to lo-fi user generated content. And these things are somewhere between that lo-fi and that high quality produced content. You might see an evolution in if TikTok gets banned, what happens to the user behavior in the United States? Do they still scroll content the same way? Or what happens if Facebook advertising, the way it does advertising, and all of a sudden the way that these things are marketed changes? Like there's huge fundamental shifts in these things can evolve that will affect short dramas. Right now, it's like so early. There's no way to know how it's gonna play out. But if I was guessing, I would keep growing. The genres will diversify. The audiences will grow, and there will be some. I don't think there will be a Netflix of short drama. Like a go-to all-in like shows for everybody. But I think there will be a handful of apps that have. This is the app you go to for like the high quality Hollywood stuff. This is the app you go to for the CEO billionaire romances. This is the app you go to for that. There's AI characters that you can talk to after the there's going to be like specialty kind of angles to everything, I think.
Because in China, we have a mini theater program embedded into Chinese version of TikTok. There's no different apps in China. Mostly
Yeah.
are in Chinese TikTok.
There's a version of this where somebody does corner the market in a way through user behaviors, essentially. But I don't know that would happen just because users in this country are still used to going to an app to consume content. That YouTube is that thing, ReelShort is that thing, right? It's not. They don't really play in the same sandbox.
In China, some live streaming platforms like Tencent or iQIYI, they have their own short drama section because they see the
Yeah,
potential of short dramas. But actually, they can't
yeah,
compete with those major players, those web novel companies. So that's the situation here in China. I'm not sure
yeah,
if YouTube joined this game, how will it compete
yeah.
with ReelShort or that kind of apps?
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of these companies, Facebook, Google with YouTube, have gotten into the content game in the past, like tried to make produced narrative fiction content in the past and pulled out. Amazon kind of got into the game, and then Facebook thought they had to do it, and then YouTube thought they had to do it, and then Facebook and YouTube were like, "Whoa, we're not doing originals anymore. This is doesn't make sense." So yeah, that could be very accurate for short dramas as well.